Harper's Kennel Stella, Missouri is proud to be sponsoring this portion of broadcasting on KNEO. Owned by Judy and Danny Harper, Harper's Kennel of Stella, Missouri specializes in French Bulldogs. For more information, the phone number is 417-628-3083.
Welcome to Crosspoint. An interactive program featuring ministers and leaders of the Christian community addressing the issues that are challenging the church today. Here's your host, Mark Taylor.
Has tyranny taken root? Have battle lines become drawn? Does the Christian have courage to address the real issues we face? Well, welcome to Crosspoint. I'm Mark Taylor, your host, and my guest today is Keisha Toni Russell from the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. She's worked there as a constitutional lawyer with First Liberty and has started out her career, though, as a teacher in Atlanta, Georgia. And today here on Crosspoint, we're going to be talking about uncommon courage, defending truth and freedom while there's still time. Right in the first part of the book here, Keisha, you talk about, it's the introductions, testify. You say that the way we live our lives reveals to others the strengths and depths of our relationship with Christ or the lack thereof. Our behavior tells a story to non-believers about Christians, but it also has the power to edify, inform, and inspire other believers to persevere with Christ. And you say, I share my testimony to persuade the non-believer and strengthen the believer. So kind of just start us off there and give us a little bit of background of your testimony.
Yeah, so I started in education. That's where I started my career, and I actually didn't grow up in church. I ended up getting saved on a trip with the Salvation Army in high school. After undergrad, I ended up in education. I felt led to do that, and then went to law because I felt like I wanted to be a stronger advocate, and I felt very led to do that. I mean, for me personally, I actually wanted to be in media and communications and things like that, but I felt led by the Lord to be a lawyer. And so that's what happened there. And I was introduced to this amazing practice area of religious liberty, which is what I do for First Liberty Institute now. We defend Christians and people of faith who are being persecuted by the government. You know, that's just been an amazing experience. And so that's what I do now. And this book has, really was inspired by not just my pastor, but a lot of my clients who were just so courageous, even though they were kind of putting everything on the line to stand up for their relationship with the Lord. So that's kind of the background.
We're thankful that you're out there. I know that you also worked as a federal law clerk in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. And how long have you been working for First Liberty Institute?
I've been working for First Liberty since 2017 when I graduated from law school. I started as an intern, working there since then. And then last year I went and clerked for the Fifth Circuit, and then I came back to First Liberty in August.
First Liberty, is that Kelly Shackelford's group?
Yes, it is.
Yes it is. Okay. Yeah, we have him on, I think, every Friday here on the station. He comes on and talks about stuff and that. I'm very big in what you do and what others do out there like this that are defending liberties, because your job has become much, much, much more critical over these last probably 10 years than I've ever known it to be. And every year it seems to be a more needed part of the Christian faith is having people out there that will defend our liberty and especially our Christian faith.
Right, and if you ask Kelly, I mean, obviously he's been doing this since the 90s, and he'll tell you that he's just shocked at what's happened in our country. And, in those days, a lot of our cases were about kids who wanted to put scriptures on their candy canes at Christmas time, and they were told no, right? And we had a lot of serious cases back then, too, but the ones we're having now, I mean, it's, vaccine mandate or you don't get to keep your job. I'm defending a teacher right now in Connecticut. Her name's Marisol Castro. She's been teaching for 32 years, grandmother of 5, and she was kicked out of the classroom because she keeps a cross by her desk, a small cross. And the district told her she can't do that, and we've actually had to sue. So we're in the middle of litigation now with the school district over a cross.
Yeah.
So that's how, it's just outrageous at this point.
Yeah.
It's outrageous.
And I can remember, Keisha, maybe you can't, but I can remember in public school as, a third grader, fourth grader, fifth grader, our teacher leading us in a prayer every morning as we begin our class and stuff. And that's almost unheard of anymore these days, unless you're maybe in a Christian school.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It's like, especially when you contrast, reading the Bible or learning about Jesus with the type of things that the left wants children to learn in school right now. The contrast just couldn't be more drastic. Because I run a lot of our education cases because of my background, and I've seen curriculum and books and things like that that are just totally inappropriate for children, totally inappropriate. And you'll see people picketing and protesting for their right to show little kids these pornographic books.
Yes.
There's just no way around it.
Yeah.
But they don't want those same kids to see a Bible scripture. It just tells you everything you need to know about where these people.
Yeah, they can't see a cross on the desk, but they can read all these other books. Yeah, I know what you're saying. Now, in that part, it's still the testify part of the book, page 21. And this is also the case. You say members of the church have gone along with the lies and they keep them up in good graces in their political and social groups, rather than embracing the truth and keeping them in the right standing with God. So we can say it's, the bad people that don't love God out there, but we've got a lot of people in our churches that don't really help this matter either, do they?
Yeah, for sure. And it's because I think the church has really fallen for the lie that the world's way of viewing things is the most compassionate way. I think we in the church have really accepted that. And not only that, a lot of people in the church love the world's, approval. They don't want to be banned. They don't want to be shunned. They don't want to be uncool. They don't want to be canceled. And so in order to prevent that, they call themselves a different kind of Christian. And, they're the compassionate Christian, or they're the sweet Christian, or they're really the loving Christian, because they're going to say it's okay, for the country to redefine marriage, or for kids to, quote unquote, choose their gender. And those are things that we need to be very vocal about. We need to be uncompromising about the Lord's standards. And when your emotions are inclined to acceptance by the world, then you're probably not going to do those things because the world doesn't like it. And you want to be approved. You want to be approved by the world. And I think that's why many Christians just kind of, they don't want to stand up for the truth. And some of them are deceived. They have been talked out of the God standard, and they don't understand why it's not okay.
Yeah.
And that's because they're just not, as engaged in reading the Word, understanding the Word, and, being a disciple, as I think we all should be.
Correct. Now, first chapter of the book, Christianity and the Constitution, on page 26, says, as Christians, we often take our spiritual freedom for granted and bind ourselves again to sin by allowing our bodies and carnal minds to have mastery over us. Scripture says that the human heart is inherently wicked, and that's Jeremiah 17:9, which is why the Holy Spirit must constantly work within us to refine our behavior and transform us to become more like Christ. So we're fighting an enemy, we know that, but we also have to fight, in a way, ourselves, don't we, in our flesh?
Always. I think the more engaged you are with the Lord, the more time you spend with Him, oftentimes that helps to eliminate some of the temptation in your life, because you're putting yourself in a different group of people and different situations. You're a lot more intentional and careful, I think, than you are when you're not as engaged with the Lord, not reading, you're not, doing all the things. So I think it can be easier, but ultimately the goal is to understand that your emotions and your body and your flesh are just not the boss. Yeah. And no matter how you feel, that is not necessarily supposed to dictate what you do. Yeah. And that is just something that the world, I don't think will ever understand, right? That's just not how the world works. And it's the reason why all the things that Christians fight with the world about, it's just really basically about standing up for God's standards and not our desires, our ability to do what we want when we want, with whomever we want.
Now, chapter 2 of the book, you call that the roadmap to tyranny. So kind of give us a little bit of that roadmap that has got us to where we're at.
Yeah, so the roadmap, I talk about, some of these incredibly oppressive societies and how they were able to establish authority over people who, in some instances, had to put, a tyrant in power. And Hitler is obviously the first one that comes to mind, but there are a lot of other examples. And I talk about how the population kind of has to be primed for that. You can't just take over a society where the population has not been prepared for it. And what I mean by that is, the goal really is to have a very obedient society where people are not going to tell you no, even when they know what you're doing is wrong. And to do that, there are a couple of things that have to happen. First, you have to divide the population, meaning you have to convince them that the people that they're around can't be trusted, are morally wrong, and you really just kind of dismantle any sort of patriotic unity. So that means you might put the Christians and the non-Christians against one another. You might put the Republicans and Democrats against one another. You might just put the Tutsis and the Hitsus against each other. That's what happened in Uganda, right? So I guess the idea there is you destroy sort of the loyalty that people have with one another. And then you start breaking down their conscience. You start convincing them that the things that they thought were wrong are actually right, and the things that they thought were right were actually wrong. And you get people into a situation where the government can do really bad things, and because of the fact that people are divided and their consciences are seared, the government can get away with a lot. Yeah. And then the last step is what we call extermination, which in most societies where this happens, that would be physical extermination, right? Genocide. But what is happening here, and I do believe abortion is a form of genocide, but what's really happening in sort of this modern form of tyranny is social extermination, meaning we're not going to actually physically harm you or kill you or anything like that, but what we are going to do is make it, very difficult for you to live in our society. We're going to take away your ability to do the things you want to do, including work, if you don't do what we say. Oh. Like, we're the bosses of your life, and you're going to give us total control and dominion, and let us do what we want. Otherwise, we're going to destroy you. And those are essentially those steps that have taken place here in America as well, which is why I say the population in America is primed for tyranny, and if the wrong person is in power, we may be in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say you're very right on with that there. Continuing in that same chapter there on page 64, you talk about tyranny destroys the conscience, and that, I believe, is what we're seeing today. You say to control the minds of people, a tyrant must sear their consciences so that they will accept the government's immoral actions. To do that, a tyrant must begin by squelching the moral voice of the culture, and that, usually is the religious one. That is the first one that they go after. You talk about that as well. This is, to me, exactly what we're seeing today. You can do a lot of things and say a lot of things until you're a Christian. And then when you try to inject your part into society or say something, then that's when everything stops and something else happens. We are seeing Christian persecution starting in this nation, are we not?
Definitely. And it's not that it's new. It's just, I think, more aggressive. And there was a time when Christians were at least, politely accepted, even if people didn't agree. And now it's just outright hostility. If we're at the place where people think it's okay to, vandalize cars just because they don't like, one person who's helping the administration, it's pretty extreme yeah. in terms of the behavior people are exhibiting right now. being a Christian in this society and being uncompromising about your belief is certainly one way to feel the wrath of the world.
Yeah, that's for sure. Now, if somebody would want to find out more about what you do and about this book, do you have a website or something that people can do that?
Yeah, so my website is KeishaToniRussell.com. Tony is with an I. And then you could also go to Harvest House. That's my publisher. You can go to their website and search for the book, Uncommon Courage, and look it up there. And then, of course, at First Liberty, if you want to look at our cases and everything we're doing, you can go to firstliberty.org, and I certainly recommend signing up for our newsletter.
Okay. And how do people, if they would have an issue like with a religious issue like this and think it would be something you'd be interested in, how do they go about contacting you to say, hey, would you take a listen to something that's happened to me at work or somewhere?
Well, the way you do that is go to firstliberty.org and fill out a request for legal help. Tell us the issue, we'll review it, and someone will get back to you.
Yeah. And if I remember right, do you not, is this a free type of a free service or something sometimes that there's a different way that how this is charged and everything?
Yeah, so we actually don't charge our clients at all. Everything is pro bono. And that is because we raise money on behalf of, our services so that we can pay for the cost, because we know a lot of the people that we help at First Liberty who are being persecuted for their faith are not going to have the money to spend in order to be in litigation. I mean, our Coach Kennedy case went on for 7 or 8 years, and he's a high school football coach. There's no way he would have been able to pay the millions and millions of dollars that it cost to do that case. So
yeah, we've even done a show with him as well and talked about that. So yeah, so folks, stay with us, and we're going to have more right after this. This is Mark Taylor. If you miss a broadcast of Crosspoint, you can always go to our website at www.kneo.org and click on the programs page. There you can access the current Crosspoint program as well as the last 4 programs that have been aired. Never miss another Crosspoint program again. Go to www.kneo.org today. And welcome back to Crosspoint. I'm Mark Taylor, and today with me I have Keisha Toni Russell. The book's called Uncommon Courage, and we're talking about defending the truth, defending freedom. While we still have a chance to do that, and I know that we've got a lot of issues out there, but Keisha, what are some of the biggest hot-button issues today in the political and the religious conversations that's going on out there?
Well, I think one of those conversations is definitely about public education. We've got 90% of students in public schools right now, and the left has a pretty strong hold on that system. And so we've got some people on the ground, of course, trying to get into the district school boards and things like that. Groups like Moms for Liberty are doing, I think, great work on the ground. But we also need to start looking at the state legislatures and the kinds of things they're allowing students to see, and the kind of curriculum they're approving, things like that. So education is a big deal right now because, like I said earlier, they're very hostile to Christianity. Even things that are just unquestionably constitutional are being challenged, just like, the cross I was telling you about, this 32-year veteran teacher who's near retirement, and all of those things are, up in the air and threatened just because she keeps a crucifix at her desk. Yeah. I mean, it's outrageous. And so that's a big issue, and the reason it's a big issue is because, the left knows that for people like us, we're committed, we're grounded in what we believe, but there are, kids are not, they're still forming, they're still vulnerable, and the reason the left, continues to go after them is because they want the minds of those children. They don't want those kids to ever have a time when they remember or have some sort of foundation to say, okay, what the left is telling me isn't true because of what I heard in church or whatever it is. They want to get those kids at 2, 3, 4, 5 if they can, and that's why we see like this push to show kindergartners pornographic material, right? Which is heinous and disgusting, but that's why they're doing it, is because they want to kind of destroy the innocence of those kids very, very early, and ensure that they don't have that conviction that many young people have because of how they were raised, and because it's natural. It's natural for a kid to not want to see these kinds of things. And so the left is really just trying to destroy that innocence. And so I think education is one of the biggest issues right now.
Yeah. And then who is probably one of the biggest pushers behind it? Would you say the LGBTQ group is the biggest pusher behind that, that's really trying to change all the things that are taught in school?
Yeah, I would say those activists are pretty prominent in that space, and are constantly trying to change what kids are seeing, because so many of us, right, are not going to change our convictions about marriage and certainly about gender identity and things like that just because they say so. And it's because we've been raised a certain way too, and because biologically we understand, spiritually we understand. And so those are the biggest pushers for that ideology and those kind of curriculum in schools.
Now, in the book, chapter titled Live with Purpose, you talk about the kingdom agenda, and you said when a court makes a decision, that decision applies only to that court's jurisdiction or its territory. For example, when a state Supreme Court decides a case, that's holding is binding only to that state. When the U.S. Supreme Court decides a case, that's enforced throughout the country. So I have a question here for you. How are these judges ruling in these other courts in a part of the United States that's just a district area and being able to stop the whole United States government from doing something?
As you know, that's a pretty hot fight right now. And you're talking about like these nationwide injunctions by a district court judge. And district court judges, I don't believe they do have that power. I think the Supreme Court is probably going to curb that here in the next couple of months. Yeah, I mean, what you're saying is true. These district court judges are kind of stepping outside their territory by saying, I'm issuing an injunction against this entire, say, bill or law or executive order, as opposed to saying I am, enjoining this law or bill or executive order against the parties before me right now.
So do they have the right to do that in their district? I mean, if they're in a certain district, do they have the right to say, you can't do that and make that law work in our district, but besides that, you can do whatever?
Generally speaking, those kinds of things aren't binding until the case is complete. Usually it would be, after the pendency of the action is when you could say, okay, this is a binding ruling in this particular area. And yeah, so those injunctions are difficult, I think, for most people to understand. But in general, yes, it's only supposed to bind the parties in front of the judge in that particular area where you are. And the location is just more nuanced legally, but I don't believe that district court judges have the authority to issue nationwide injunctions, essentially.
Yeah. Established justice, that's your chapter 8 of the book. And there before, at the end of that chapter, you talk about the overall church must be united intentionally so that we can have an impact externally. If we want to maintain justice in our society, we must consistently and neutrally uphold God's standards. When we are united by God's standards, we will be united in our message to the world, and we will be united when we minister to the world, and we will avoid being deceived by the world. Now, I work with a lot of churches, and I know it's not easy to always get those churches always to work on the same page. And now we've got churches out here that are kind of went rogue, and I don't even know if they believe the Bible anymore. So this is not an easy job, but it's something that the true Christians have got to start working more together, do they not?
Definitely, and we have to be louder. I mean, I think we just have to be just as loud as the people who are promoting this type of, evil doctrine. I don't think there's any other choice, because that really is our job, to be the moral compass of society, to stand up for God's standards and to do so without compromise. But I think a lot of people, again, they don't want to do that. And frankly, I think some of these churches they're not really churches. I mean, the Bible warns us about wolves in sheep's clothing. And many of these churches are just taking on that form. So, being called a church is one thing. Actually being a church is another. Yeah. And I think we need to be the ones to say and to be very clear about that as well, Yeah. And not allow, our own community, our own congregation to be swept away by the lies that are imposed by these other churches.
Yeah. Well, I know you said in part there, too, of that book, you said, and this really stuck out to me, you said a weak church creates a vulnerable nation. And I guess that would be in about anything because, you can look at all kinds of forms of protection, but really the church is the greatest protection we can have if it's done the way the biblical church is supposed to be, right?
Oh, absolutely. I believe that wholeheartedly. I think once, some of the entities in society are trying to push their agenda, that includes like the advocacy groups we've talked about, and, people in government that are have these immoral goals, it's the church that will stand up and say this is wrong. And the church has so much power. It's one of the reasons why the government has tried to silence the church with things like the Johnson Amendment, which tells the church that it's not allowed to talk about or promote candidates and things like that. That's really just a mechanism to silence the church, essentially, and to try to squelch its influence. But we need to understand how powerful we really are and walk in that power and walk in the truth that we're bringing.
Yeah. So how should the church then respond to biblical and cultural and political issues? How should they do that in the right way? What would you tell the church to be doing if a pastor was asked you, what can I do to help? How can I help? What would you tell them?
I would tell them to ensure that their congregation is knowledgeable about what's going on, and that they understand what candidates believe. Because even if at this point, the law prevents churches from actually taking a stand on one, candidate or the other, they can certainly say this candidate believes this and the other candidate believes that, and this is biblical and that isn't.
Yeah.
And so I think just being really bold about that is necessary at this point, and explaining why. Why do Christians believe what we believe about marriage, abortion, things like that. We need to be very clear about those standards and why they exist and why we can't be talked out of it. That's difficult, I think, for some, but I think, how can they hear without a preacher? I think it's important that the pastors break those things down for the congregation so that the congregation can leave informed and, they have the tools and the words to express God's views on a particular topic.
Yeah. So now tell us again, it's called Uncommon Courage is the book. Keisha, how do people go about finding out about the book, but also finding about your ministry there at First Liberty?
So you can go to my website, KeishaToniRussell.com, and you can go to the website for Harvest House, who's a publisher, and look up the book, Uncommon Courage, Defending Truth and Freedom While There is Still Time. Or you can put in Uncommon Courage and it'll come up. And then you can also go to firstliberty.org, which I think on that website you'll find a lot of our cases. There's also an opportunity to sign up for our newsletter, which is amazing, and you'll be able to figure out what's going on with a lot of our cases. We do cover other cases, too, that we're not necessarily fighting, but are related to religious liberty. Sometimes we'll tell you what the administration is doing. For example, with the new White House Faith Initiative, what is that about? What does it mean? Those are the kinds of things we cover in our newsletter, and it helps really keep the church informed.
All right. Well, folks, we still have more, so stay with us. We'll be right back.
Offering words to encourage, teaching to inspire, and truth that defines real life.
This is who we are, what we offer, and what you can expect.
91.7 The Word.
And welcome back to Crosspoint. We're talking with Keisha Toni Russell. We're talking about uncommon courage. Right now, what would you say would be the most predominant threat to religious liberty? Would it be just that the Christians are uninformed and not participating, or what would you say would be about the biggest threat we've got right now in religious liberty?
Well, I think the state of the church is one, but I think the major threat is probably the advocates for sexual revolution. And the reason why I say that is because those advocacy groups have unbelievably demonized Christians, the ones that will not change their beliefs about, these issues. And at the Supreme Court, and, we've won a lot of those cases, thank God, and a lot of that is because of the judges that, President Trump put on the bench in his first term. But still, we have a push to essentially demonize and make illegal the beliefs that Christians hold. And so when you think about cases like Masterpiece, Cake Shop, right, yeah, which most people remember the Cake Baker case, and also there's a case with an adoption agency that didn't want to certify same-sex couples. I mean, you've got these cities and local governments and states and whatnot that want to basically say you can't participate in public service unless you are willing to do it the way the government says. And that's heinous, especially when you think about the fact that the church has been probably the number one provider of public service historically, and we do it for free, right? And the fact that the government's going to come in and tell the church how to serve the people is just incredibly threatening. And that's why a lot of these institutions are constantly in litigation. And, groups like the Little Sisters of the Poor, right, a group of nuns that said they were not going to provide birth control for their employees who are nuns, were dragged into court for I don't even know how long over the Obamacare contraceptive mandate. It was years. Why? Because they have a belief about abortion and about contraception, and we want to demonize that and take that away from them. That is a huge threat, I think. And all of this is about, mostly the sexual revolution. Some of it is about abortion, although we've made some inroads in that area. But I do think we've got a lot of work to do, because it really is that idea of the sexual orientation, gender identity space is what is dividing the church right now. And then we've got some issues in terms of the way people idolize race and things like that. Yeah. Idolize meaning IDOL, right? Making a complete idol out of your race, I think, is also another problem that I see happening a lot. But I would have to say those two things.
Yeah. Now, you do point out something here in your book, which I thought was good for people to know, and I believe it's in chapter 10 of the book, speak and recognize truth. But you tell the story in there, and you're talking about it, and I'm looking at page 217, but you were talking about there was a fire in Berlin. You're talking about the time of Hitler, and how this disaster was a way for him to blame others for that, and then within 24 hours, how all these freedoms were just gone or suspended, and within days, a lot of these people were being arrested. And then you went on to talk about, how this all, solidified the power for Hitler. And within 52 days after all this happened, he became dictator, and hundreds of thousands of people were arrested. And then people, became the Nazis, and they began to torture and steal. And it says there, for everyone else, life was normal, but for anybody that opposed him, it wasn't. You could kind of look at some people having some pretty bad ideas about where they'd like to take America when you see these very same things happening, yet they're the ones pointing the finger, say, you're the one that's doing it. But that's not really the case. There is a group of people out there that have really got some bad ideas for this nation.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I guess the most salient example for me is what happened during COVID, right? So we know that it wasn't the fault of those who had a religious exemption to vaccinations. That wasn't the reason the virus is spreading. It's a virus that's going to spread. But there was this narrative for so long that it's, these anti-vaxxer Christians who won't get vaccinated, and it's their fault. I mean, and ultimately, we ended up defending some Navy SEALs, okay? Some of the most healthy, strong people in the world who are defending our country were being threatened with being dishonorably discharged from the services just because they didn't want to get this vaccine for good reason. And, they were being demonized, and the country was allowing it. And all of this was happening at the same time when President Biden was saying that it's because of the anti-vaxxers that people are dying, and that kind of thing. And then you have immediately after that, churches are being shuttered, but Costco's open, the strip club's open, the bar's open, but the church can't be open. It's the same idea, it's the same strategy, right, that a lot of these leaders are employing in order to get the power sort of consolidated in a way where the population is going to allow it. So remember, a lot of people in America were very much in favor of the vaccine mandate, even though the Biden administration did not have the authority to do it. Unquestionably, went way beyond the bounds of power to mandate and dictate that virtually every employer in the country require vaccination, including nonprofits and whatnot. Yeah. So that sweeping mandate, and a lot of the people in the country were fine with it. Yeah. They were fine with it.
That's true. That's true. Now, in that same chapter there, you talk about, and I'm glad you do, you talk about this area called the advantage of the crowd, take advantage of the crowd. You say, while Christians can use different forms of media to share truth with a wide range of people through the media, we are susceptible to Satan's cunning rhetoric. Because of all the vast networks Satan has at his disposal through the media, people are likely to hear his lies more than hearing God's truth. And then you talk about how repetition is powerful, which is the reason that over time Christians can end up losing their moral convictions because they keep hearing all these other things that aren't true that's going on out there. But the media is a tremendous one that we have to watch, because they are the ones that are really bringing a lot of these lies and this other stuff. And I don't even have to say it just for nationwide stuff. I mean, I think there's like only 6 really major companies that control 90% of the media anyway in the United States. But they're the ones that you've got to watch, because they're the mouthpieces of all this stuff that's going on.
Yeah, and they're definitely indoctrinating a lot of people. So you've got on a lot of different fronts, right? So promoting a lot of just race obsession in our culture, which is a form of division, right? Which is why you have, a lot of churches not relevant to the kingdom of God, and in the sense like dividing us by color and expecting the government to promote preferential treatment based on color and things like that, which is immoral. All of that is based on, propaganda in the media in a lot of ways, and the demonization of Christian ideals, or really any idea that does not coincide with what the media thinks you should believe. And that is an incredibly powerful tool, because most people are looking at that kind of media. Now we know, based on what happened in the last election, that, quite a few people are kind of waking up to it, and many of them are relying on independent podcasts and things like that to get some of their news now. And it's because the mainstream media has really lost a lot of credibility, particularly because of what happened with the cover-up of Joe Biden's condition by the mainstream media. And so there's a window of opportunity here where a lot of Americans are open to hearing what independent and conservative media have to say on these subjects, because they do feel like they've been, lied to. And they have been.
Well, you talk about here at the end of taking a stand in the book, and you say there's no question that the best direct evidence of Christianity are the eyewitness testimonies of the gospel, and you refer to, the case of Christ with Lee Strobel in that area there. And that's what we have to point out a lot of times. And I mean, what you're involved in there, you've got to know the law. I know you talk about that on one of your pages of the Master of Your Defense. And then you mentioned also the wall of separation, which I like this, between the church and Satan. We keep always hearing about the wall of separation of church and state, but it's actually it's between church and Satan is what we're really facing and up like this. So you put a lot of work, into this book, but I'm glad that you do challenge us, like you do as a lawyer, to know what you're doing. But as Christians, we need to be the students of the Bible, and that will help us defend our faith a lot better, won't it?
Yeah, and the other thing it does is it helps us to have the words to defend our faith, but it also gives us this remarkable conviction and power, because we know without a shadow of a doubt that what we believe in has merit. And when you study apologetics, even just, you don't have to go to seminary, but understanding why the Bible is the best-selling book in the world, and its historical value and the precision and accuracy of a lot of the things the prophets have said in the books, that's going to give you the confidence to stand behind the words of the Bible. So it's not just, obviously you believe in faith, but there are a lot of, very substantively practical and provable positions in that book. And the more you study it, the more you'll see how unbelievably reliable it actually is.
Yeah. Well, I know you tell us in the book to rely on God as our spiritual health and not to be looking at politics for what we think we have need of out there in the world. So as you go about your day each and every day, what is it that keeps you going, that makes you, have that uncommon courage that you wrote about in this book? What pushes you to do that each and every day?
Well, it's helpful for me because I'm in this space all the time. As a lawyer, I defend religious freedom, so it's in my face every day. But even besides that, I try to keep, I'm constantly listening to people talking about the Word. I have podcasts that I listen to, and even conservative podcasts that are giving me the entire story about what's going on in the news and things like that. I try to keep, that right front and center. And, I listen to, people on, the Daily Wire, things like that, just because the reporting, I think, is just so high quality. And that helps in me being able to make my own decisions about voting and legislation and things like that. So you have to find alternative news sources that you think are going to help. And, stations like yours that promote, biblically centered conversations, but also thoughtful and robust conversations about what's going on in the world, what's going on in politics. That's going to help, Christians be able to make the best decisions and to stay knowledgeable. But also, and the most important thing, obviously, is knowing that we're ambassadors of Christ. And being an ambassador means you're in a place that isn't really your home, right? Our homes are with the Lord. And so there has to be a sense of detachment about what's going on around you sometimes, because otherwise you can get very, I think, overwhelmed and worried and sad. But just, the earth is the Lord's, and ultimately His will prevail.
Yeah.
And we all know what's supposed to happen at the end, and that's supposed to give us peace and help us to not be so consumed with the world and the condition.
Well, Keisha, before you go, again, tell people how they can find out more about your ministry and also this book, Uncommon Courage.
Sure. So you can go to my website, Keisha Toni Russell, Toni with an I.com, and you'll find out information about my book and requesting speaking events for, having me come to speak. You can go to harvesthouse.com to search for the book, Uncommon Courage. You can buy it from there. And if you want to know more about the work we do at First Liberty, just go to firstliberty.org. Definitely sign up for our newsletter, and it will keep you informed about not just our cases, but many things religious liberty related going on in our country right now.
All right. Well, Keisha, thank you so much for being our guest today here on Crosspoint.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Folks, great interview today. Hey, we need to be active out there. We need to be doing the things that God's asked us to do, step forward and be the church that He's called us to be. Good book there to help us to learn from, the better book, but the book that goes with these other books is the book they always talk about, the Bible, the Holy Bible that's in my hand right now. And this Bible contains the most important words you're ever going to read and ever need to be following, because it is an inspired words of God. They're never outdated. Be sure and join us again next time as we again discuss issues that are affecting the church. Have a great week. Allow God to use you for His purposes so that greater things can be done. Make your life count in God's plans for eternity. I'm Mark Taylor.
Crosspoint is a program produced in Studio 101 at KNEO Radio. Not all of the views on Crosspoint reflect those of the management or staff of KNEO. You may contact the Crosspoint program at 10827 Highway 86 East, Neosho, Missouri 64850, or by email crosspoint@kneo.org. You can hear Crosspoint 4 times a week: Saturday morning at 1, Saturday afternoon at 2, Saturday evening at 9, and Sunday evening at 7. You can also listen anytime online at kneo.org.